All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Town of Halifax Finance Committee meeting, the Tri-Town meeting, and we want to sincerely thank everyone who came out tonight and made a longer drive than we have to have this conversation. Special thanks too to Linda for helping to organize everybody so that we could all be here this evening. One thing I want to note, tonight is Monday, February 24th, 2020. The Finance Committee of Town of Halifax has a quorum at 4. Right now we do not have quorum, so we cannot conduct official business, but we're still going to call the meeting to order and have the Tri-Town meeting and have the conversation. If at any point we do obtain quorum of the FinCom for Halifax, we'll still finish the conversation with the Tri-Town members before moving to official business. So as you know, obviously we won't be able to take any votes or do anything of that nature, but we still want to have the conversation since everyone was so kind to come out tonight. I think it'd be helpful, I know some of us have gotten a chance to meet other folks, but it might be beneficial to just sort of quickly go around the room, name and your position. So Cheryl, can I?
I'm Cheryl Zarella-Burke. I'm a member of the Finance Committee.
I'm Dr. Melinda Tarsi. I'm the chair of the Halifax Finance Committee.
I'm Bill McAvoy, Vice Chair.
Linda Cole, Secretary.
Gordon Andrews on the school committee, Select School Committee, and Board of Selectmen.
Christine Healy, Director of Business Services at Silver Lake.
Jill Prue, Superintendent, Silver Lake.
There you go. Jason Frazier, the Chair of the Silver Lake Regional School Committee.
Larry Porter for Kingston.
Deborah McLean, Vice Chair of FinCom in Kingston.
Jim Sewell, member of the FinCom Committee in Kingston.
Kyle Pike, Finance Committee. Chris Eklund, Kingston, Silver Lake Regional School Committee.
Jess Kramer, Kingston Selectman.
Sandy Nolan, Halifax Town Accountant.
Charlie Silly, Town Minister at Halifax. Stephen Lewis, Plimpton, FinCom.
Thank you again all so much for being here. We wanted to bring everyone to the table to have a conversation about the Silver Lake Regional School District budget, not just this particular year's budget, but also sort of philosophically. I know that we've had various interactions with each other, but also with the school committee. We have a copy of the most recent proposal, the February 13th dated proposal. I wanted to give the members of the Silver Lake School Committee a chance to address any potential concerns or make any comments before we sort of open up the floor and hear from the other towns.
So I think Carl and Charlie did an excellent job summing up the situation at the Silver Lake Regional School Committee at our last meeting. We made some difficult choices and made some hard cuts in our budget. Those cuts in that budget has not been voted on yet by the school committee, but we managed to trim the budget down to just under 3%. That did include 2 full-time equivalent reductions, 2 teachers, 2 real people, that we will have to let go if we vote that budget through. We heard loud and clear from the town of Kingston at our September meeting that they were looking for us to bring in a level service budget if possible. Didn't receive any formal guidance from Plimpton this year, but in the years past, they've asked us to try and stay between 2.5% and 3% with the budget. We know that just under 3 is pretty close to 3. But again, we added an allied health teacher to our budget. And only 0.5% of that teacher is actually being seen in the budget because half of that position is being funded by the Perkins grant, which is a federal grant for career and technical education purposes. We're also adding a half-time nurse leader. It's an administrative position to oversee the nurses of all of our schools from the elementary all the way up to the high school. So we did reduce a 2.0 full-time equivalent, and we've added about a 1.0 full-time equivalent in teaching position. The rest of the increases are coming from things such as the Mayflower, Plymouth County retirement. Our aides receive a retirement, a pension through Plymouth County, and the actuary tables came out and it looked like we needed to give them a 12.5% increase over last year to make sure we were covering our share of what our employees are entitled to upon retirement. So that had quite a hit upon our budget. We're also looking at transportation cost increase. I know all of us are looking at transportation right now, and I know our superintendent and our business manager are even looking at some unique, different ways of approaching that bidding process, potentially going with longer contracts than before to see if we can attract a partner who's willing to give us a better rate. But again, we don't have a final number on that transportation yet, so Christine she's been known to do is given us a nice conservative placeholder for that. Hopefully that number can work its way back down once the budget comes in. So the 2.99-ish% budget increase you're seeing right now, we did instruct the administration to come back with some additional areas of potential cuts that the school committee can look at. I'm not saying that the school committee will have the inclination to go further. We are actually very interested in hearing from the three towns and where you would like to see the budget go, so we can balance the needs of the students with the needs of the town.
Great, thank you. Anyone else from the school committee or from the school system? I didn't want to put anyone on the spot, but I did want to make sure that everyone, so like, for example, getting the updated information about the new potential cuts that haven't yet been voted on is really helpful. And all of us appreciate all of the work that all of our committees are doing. We're all in the exact same spot. We're all volunteers or elected, and we're all, sitting here on weeknights trying to figure things out. So all of your hard work is very, very appreciated. I'd like to open up the floor to either of the other towns, if anyone. I know we heard from Carl at the school committee meeting, which was really helpful. I don't know, Carl, if you want to, just for a different audience, potentially restate some of the issues that you raised there, or if anyone else would like to jump in.
I'd just like to add where we stand with our total budget now. We're looking at a total budget excluding our water and wastewater operations of $50.3 million. And out of that, the schools, between our local schools and the Silver Lake assessment, is $25.7 million, 51%, which is what we really usually expect, that the schools are, in most communities run around 50%. The increase for us in our schools is a total of $909K for a 3.5% net increase, including the assessment. The employee benefits are another $474K increase for 3.2%. The place where I get a lot of pushback, and I think the schools get the pushback, is that when we take these numbers into consideration, the increase for everything else in our budget, police, fire, facilities, streets, roads, et cetera, is only $320K, which is about 1.7%. So that, and we all want to support the schools, but we need to recognize that as we end up with 3.5% total increase for schools, it impacts everything else to the extent that they're looking at 1.7%. One of the things that I try to emphasize when somebody stops me on the street and complains about taxes is that I've heard a lot of talk in Kingston at least, we're looking at 3% gross budget, bottom line expense. So that's a reasonable budget. Well, our average tax bill, residential tax bill in Kingston is about $6,500. So if across the board you have 3% increases, that's an automatic $200 tax increase for every resident every year. And I firmly believe, as I've said before, that it's difficult to sustain that year after year, decade after decade. And so, we all talk about commercial development. Well, when we talk about commercial development, we can't fight every commercial project that comes along because there's an environmental group that doesn't want anything to go in there. There's an anti-marijuana group that doesn't want marijuana anywhere in town. There's a anti-traffic group that doesn't want anything on Main Street because it will increase the traffic problems. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I personally, and I think the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen, the town administration, tries strenuously to support the school budgets at around 2.5% to 3%. But in the long run, now I'm starting to sound like John Creed. In the long run, if we don't see a year where we have a 2% budget increase across the school, and you know, those of you that have heard me before, you know that I'm always looking at the bottom line expenses. So that if your bottom line expenses are 3% and Kingston's happens to be 4.5%, I'm not complaining about the 4.5%. That the assessment is what it needs to be based upon the distribution of students and based upon the minimum required contribution. So it's my feeling that, you know, one of these years, somehow we have to find a way of, you know, having a reduced school budget for at least a year.
Thank you. Anyone else from the Finance Committee of Kingston or any reactions from Plimpton?
Oh, the one Plimpton?
Sure, who you'd like. I'm not calling you out, but if you want to, if you had anything from your committee that they wanted to ensure that was brought forward tonight.
Nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think sort of to echo Charlie's sentiments, and he would restate them much more eloquently, so please, Charlie, feel free to jump in at any point. Although Halifax seems to be on sort of the quote-unquote winning end this year in terms of having a lower overall assessment, I think we share the same long-term concerns that Carl has expressed from Kingston. It's not necessarily about the year that we're in right now, it's about thinking a few years down the line at the point at which it's going to be more than the town can handle. From our perspective, as I'm sure you're in the same, many are in the same boat, that we really have to hold back other departments until we hear from the schools, and that we can ask for the level service budgets from every other department, but we're really unable to sort of put all the pieces together until we hear back from schools. And I understand part of that, the scheduling is no one's fault really, but when there's so much variability and when we're always sort of bracing for the potential worst, it does make it really difficult to be able to expand or address any other concerns in other parts of local government when we know that the schools are going to potentially come in. Like I said, things like the transportation contracts, you know, that vary widely from year to year. The things that we can control, though, are the things that the school committee can control. I know that it's of Halifax, and any of my other committee members, please jump in if you want to add something. That we would appreciate you thinking not just about the year that we're in, but as Charlie mentioned, a few years down the road, to the point at which Halifax won't be able to shoulder the burden that it has.
Yeah, I agree. You need to look a little further down the road. You can't keep expecting the taxpayers and the taxes to keep going up the way they are, year after year.
And I feel like I'm teaching, I'm just calling on people, but that's what I do with my day job. So Socratic method. Charlie, I don't know if there's anything.
The thing is simply long-term.
Yeah.
We know that student population goes up and down in terms of which town is gaining students or losing students in percentage-wise. So Plimpton and Halifax, it's a decent year. Kingston, not so much this coming year. We know, however, already, because we can see the numbers in the annual demographics, that we're going to start getting hit 2 or 3 years down the road. So we'll see the 4% or more increase in our assessment. So my concern overall is, I understand you're looking at budget, we're looking at assessment. In that the budget could go up, I'm making this up 2%, but the assessment goes up 3%. Because Chapter 70 covers 30%, and you're not getting any increase in your chapter 70. In fact, you still could have the potential for losing money on that if the charter and other school assessments get changed midstream, but I know it was, I think it was Attleboro, North Attleboro last year. They got the House budget in April, and they got hit with several $100,000 more. Suddenly that a hole, they're not a regional school district, but principals the same, and suddenly it's like, wait a minute, how are we making this up? And because you have already passed that budget, it would be a double problem for you all and for us. But setting all that aside, that's what we need to look at. I'm not competent to get into the details of the individual line items in the Silver Lake school budget. I do have enough information to say, here's what we can afford for an assessment. And long term, there'll be individual years we're fine, there'll be individual years we won't, but long term, an assessment that's gonna be increasing 3% per year overall for the 3 towns, you're gonna be hitting walls in one town or another. We're gonna hit a wall in 2 or 3 years, and we're gonna be, in order to cover Silver Lake, we're gonna be saying no to a lot of other people. This year, we might very well be able to say yes to Silver Lake, and still say yes to everybody else, but the same won't be true in a couple of years. And in Kingston, I'm sure, well, I don't know, because I don't have the numbers.
We're closer to the wall.
Yeah, there you are, right. And some other year might be Plimpton.
So what's your Prop 2.5 for Kingston this year?
What do you ask, that the increase, or what do you?
What's the
Percent we use it.
you like 700 or 800?
The increase, the allowable increase is about 850.
Right.
And right now, I'm looking at probably using 500 of that, having somewhere around 300 left. And I personally like to leave more than that on the table.
So you're only gonna be 300,000 in excess capacity?
Yeah.
No, the excess capacity will be more than that.
Mhm.
But the actual, just looking at that one piece, the 2.5%, will be, and that's kind of the easiest one for me to explain to people, that, hey, 2.5% of X is 850, and we're leaving.
Well, I mean, because the numbers you said were 900,000 for just the schools, so you're eating up the 2.5% right there.
That's correct. That's correct. But with new growth and additional local revenues, and that's another thing we've done that I'm not too excited about. The town administration is getting less conservative on local revenues every year. That, we at one time were probably conservative by $1 million on local revenues. We have local revenues of somewhere around 5 million. And at one time, we were able to be conservative by close to $1 million. This year, I don't see a lot of conservatism in our local revenue numbers at all. That's one of the things that I'll be reviewing the rest of this week.
So I do think that the committee has heard that this needs to be a more long-term strategic plan. And I want you to recognize that the areas of proposed cuts to staffing and the increase for the allied health half-time teacher is a long-term plan. Elliot Glass, who's the Director of Career and Technical Education, is currently in the final steps of getting Chapter 74 approval for that allied health program. Once that happens, every student who's enrolled in the allied health program will bring in additional Chapter 74 funds from the state, which are quite substantial. So the money you're seeing for the increase right now, for even half of that teacher that we're requesting from the towns, will be more than covered by the money, we're hoping, that comes in from the Chapter 74 funding. I don't want to make any guarantees because we don't have it signed yet, but I want to make sure that you do understand this is the first committee in close to a decade that has looked at making staffing cuts in a legitimate way. And that has been very open in the two-way communications with all of the towns, four-way communication if you want to call it. We hear what you're saying. We understand the situation that the towns are finding themselves in. But at the same time, we do have to make sure we do it very strategically, so we don't dismantle, words that were used by my colleague at the back of the room, we don't dismantle the wonderful programs in the schools that our three towns all benefit from. I think acknowledging the $200 increase in taxes is something that should be brought to everyone's forefront. But I think at the same time, we should also acknowledge that one of the reasons people move into our three towns is because of the school system itself, which helps sustain those property values as well. So we have to be extremely careful that we're meeting the state mandates, that we're covering the curriculum content. We're going to have to do some restructuring if we do make those two cuts to make sure that all of the ELA curriculum frameworks are being met in the 7th grade curriculum within the English classrooms. So there's quite a bit of jigsaw working to be done here. But we are looking long term. This is not just to meet a number for this year. We're trying to take a wide view of what we currently have and how we can utilize our personnel to the most effective for the kids.
And I also will acknowledge that it's not just Silver Lake that I'm referring to, that our local Kingston schools and special education, we also need to be working with them to, make sure that, we're providing the special education and the great education for everybody, but at the same time, is there anything in there that we can possibly do to, kind of balance the budget, so to speak?
So the one thing from perspective being over there for a number of years and now being on the school committee is the investment that we made in bringing in the special ed programs into the district definitely reduced the cost of out-of-district placements that we've had. So maybe next year we come to you looking at the student population that is within the towns and say, if we expand here, we can help reduce the overall cost of education. And that might help one town more than another one year, but overall, we'd be looking to reduce the cost by increasing programs within the school system.
And even in cases where I'm not always looking for reduction in cost as much as reducing the average increase that we see every year.
Yeah.
So that, in some cases that, if we see a 1% increase in special education instead of a 5%, then we're making some real progress.
I think another, and this is from my personal perspective, but I think something that we need to acknowledge too is that a lot of us haven't been serving in these positions during a time of fiscal crisis at all. I personally have only ever known increasing state revenues and a good financial picture, but frankly we're overdue for some type of financial disruption at the national level. And then when that hits the municipal levels, the state municipal levels, then I think there's going to be folks that have gone through that before in various roles in service, but there's going to be a lot of us who haven't had to yet grapple with a lot of really difficult choices to be made. And that's something that I think is sort of, at least for us, we're always reminding ourselves of that sort of specter in the room, that even if this is an okay year, there's going to be a year that it's not okay. Yeah. And that just sort of adds to the long-term planning to just kind of highlight that, like I said, a lot of us haven't been through a year like that, but the ones who have been, the ones who provide a lot of helpful feedback on the kinds of problems that we'll face when that happens.
I think the other issue that we should look long-term is, replacement and replacement of equipment within the schools and actually work done to the schools. So approximately 2027 budget, the debt drops off. So I would just request everyone to acknowledge that we will need to probably extend out with capital expenditures for a few years some form of that debt payment or as capital expenditures so that we can replace the equipment at the school. I'm not saying it has to be at the same level that we have the debt taken out for the 1.5 million that we all pay, but maybe a portion of that so that we can replace some of the things at the schools.
And has the capital, like the 5-year capital plan, been updated?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is a living document. It has the history of the past 5 years if you really want to dig into it, but we project out for several years into the future. And we've been paying that through E&D with the blessings of the three towns. But that methodology is coming to, it's gonna come to an end sooner rather than later. The outlay from it has been between $500,000 and $800,000 over the past 5 years. Last year, when we were in this room together, we were talking about possibly having to replace both of the roofs on the high school and the middle school. Luckily, the administration, working with some very good vendors and contractors, have managed to mitigate and turn around that crisis and turn it into more of a maintenance issue at this point. We've actually have a new warranty for.
We are doing, there's a portion of work that has to be done to bring the roof back into warranty,
Which-
and we are doing that.
We didn't even know where the warranty was last year. This time, work had been done on it that could have brought the warranty into question. So the fact that we've brought the roof up to that point, that hopefully now we can live through a few years and get up to MSBA status eventually and look at a replacement if we ever need one. The roof is too young to even be considered for state aid at this point. That all came from, some really hard work and some fiscal planning. Luckily, we have some revenue sources, but a few of them were one-time revenue sources. The Pembroke settlement being one of them. And we also did some accounting and realized we'd been saving extra money for employee medical coverage over the summer. So once we figured out that money, we threw it into the capital plan as well through E&D. What Gordon's saying is definitely true. This stream of money is going to dry up soon, and instead of having to come back constantly for capital expenditures, we might want to look at that debt exclusion coming off the books.
One of the things that I have said personally, and I try to remind our town management people every so often, is that a lot of the Silver Lake capital expenditures have in fact come from their leftover excess from the budget. You tighten the budget up so much that there's not a nickel left over, then the three towns can start paying the capital improvements out of the regular budget. So that, it's kind of a balancing act that, I certainly don't want to have a budget that never has any conservatism in it to provide some excess at the end of the year that can be used the next year for capital.
Any other comments about sort of the overall budget at this point from any of the towns or from the Silver Lake committee members? Or one issue that Halifax wanted to bring up to the other towns and the committee as well was the part-time school resource officer for the middle school. So the last year when this issue came before us as an article, the finance committee did not recommend this to annual town meeting for a few reasons. One of them was that we had asked for some data, some information on the necessity of this position. The other, at the sort of more philosophical level, was that we did not approve of the idea of a new position coming through an article as opposed to coming in the operating budget. Not just because of the precedent that it sets, but also because other departments in Halifax had made new position requests that had been documented year over year that we said no to across the board. We didn't allow any new positions last year, and we had to include that part-time resource officer in that same category. That is a new position, even if it's as an article, we simply cannot proceed if we're not allowing other departments to realize those needs as well. We had talked a lot at the meeting we had the same time last year about the structure of that funding, and that there were sort of some differences of opinion as to whether or not different agreements could work. And I think Halifax's position was sort of a request to go back to the drawing board, bring the chiefs together, bring the towns together, and see if we could structure an agreement in a way that was equitable to all of the towns, and that didn't place an undue burden on anyone, but then also allowed each of the towns to contribute in a meaningful way besides just financially, because we understand that Kingston, regardless, would be on the hook for this position. I know that our chief has submitted a letter both to the finance committee and to the school board indicating that while he approves of the idea of the school resource officer, he does not, or he has some concerns about that funding structure, essentially taking $20,000 from his budget to go to Kingston. And one of the things we were wondering too is sort of what Kingston's position on this, what Plimpton's position, because as of right now, the general temperature of the finance committee has been that it looks just like it did last year, and sort of structurally and coming in as an article, we still would not want to recommend a new position that's put in as an article as opposed to being put in the operating budget. I've started to ask, I was asking around other towns who have regional school districts if they have agreements that we could take a look at. So I've got emails out to other folks to see how other towns handle sharing a school resource officer position. But I wanted to open up not just to the other towns, but also to the school board so we can have a conversation about this as well.
I think it's safe to say that Kingston's position is that we're comfortable paying for the high school resource officer. Not very interested in contributing much more.
Right.
And I hate to say this, but at times I think that all of the great things that schools want, that police departments want, that fire departments want, that sometimes we have to look at something and say, well, you know, maybe we just can't afford it. Maybe we can't afford to have a full-time resource officer in 2 different schools that are within walking distance of each other. And that's just from a financial manager's point of view, just saying that at the same time, I've always said that the schools have their funds, the school committees, the school administrations, they run their budget and they know what they really need. But, you know, I've said this to other departments that, you know, again, do we really want to sell communities that 3% across the board is what you have to live with? What has concerned me for many years in Kingston is that sometimes you can have a small minority that can suddenly make enough noise and become a big enough factor that I think we're seeing it right now. And I just don't want to get to the point where we go to a town meeting and we've got, let's pick a number. We usually have 150 people at a town meeting. So we go to a town meeting and we've got 250 people there, and 150 of them are people that absolutely want real estate taxes cut. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves in a real budget crisis where somebody on town meeting floor is suggesting that we take $1 million out of a school budget or $200,000 out of a fire budget. So, you know, that's just another piece of the pie, a way of saying that, you know, it seems to me that we've for you know, the education budgets between the 3 towns have got to be approaching $100 million. And, you know, we ought to be able to figure a way that either we have to do this resource officer in every school and we can afford it and without making other cuts or something, or we move on.
We were, like I said, we're not even debating whether or not, I mean, at this point, the Halifax Finance Committee hasn't issued a recommendation on whether or not we think that the school needs one, so sort of setting aside the issue of need or, you know, obviously everyone agrees that they want schools to be safe. That's not even something that we're debating at this point. But I think that the structure of the funding, to your point, what's sustainable, and putting a position as an article necessarily makes it an unstable position, right? Because if Halifax comes back next year and says, so let's say they vote on it to approve this year and the next year they don't, Kingston's still stuck with the bill, stuck with the position, and that's just not a durable model long-term for anybody. And that was one of the things that we were sort of hoping to see a way to negotiate this agreement such that it would be essentially programmed into our assessment. And I realize that for some folks that's just 6 in one hand and half a dozen the other. Either way, it's money, right? It's money out either way. But we strongly believe that the way you set up a program, the way you set up a position matters for the way that thing continues. And that this might not be the best way to set up this new position to make it something that can continue in the long term. I don't know if anyone else from Kingston or Plimpton has any reactions or has had any discussions about it either.
I have something to say on that one. I think it's somewhat surprising when we're talking about half a body for a resource officer, managing 1,500 people, 400 cars going through that area, if not more because of just general traffic, that we can't come to some solution to get this done. I'm a Kingston resident. I know we've been funding it for a long time. I know the person's always busy. What's going on from a mental standpoint for the students, the support they need to see an officer there. I think if we pulled the officer because we don't think the need is there, the administration would be put a little bit at risk. The teachers would have more on their plate to monitor. And I know if we had a public party, if you had a block party with 300 people and you wanted permission, I almost think the towns might say, hey, you need a detail. You know, when you run a road race, you have 400 runners in the street, you need a detail. So I think when we have 1,500 kids and teachers and parents driving through there every day, it's a concern. And it's a 9-month concern, I get that, and that's where I think Kingston has to be the town to step up, because they're gonna need to foot the bill for the other 3 months. We can't sort of outsource and get a security guard at WeWork just for 9 months of the year, 5 days a week.
There's no hesitation that Kingston is behind.
Correct.
What we're doing now for in effect, a full-time resource officer for 9 months out of the year.
Yeah.
What I'm referring to is a second
Sure.
one up there.
Yeah.
And just make sure we're all on the same page. Right now, we aren't proposing a second full-time officer. We were proposing a half-time officer.
Correct.
And we put it before you as an article again this year, and I understand that's not the mechanism you wanted. If we put it into the budget, the net increase on Plimpton would be nothing. The net increase on Kingston would be nothing. So with our 2.99% budget, we might get that passed, and then you might be stuck with the percentage of that increase, even though we're asking for a level service budget. Didn't want to go nuclear necessarily on the town of Halifax and force you into that situation. I also want to acknowledge that we had a change in leadership during the fall and the winter. Joy, who'd been with us for over 12 years, left Jill with the ship running in a good direction and soundly. And we have all the confidence in the world that Jill can navigate and take us into the future. I'll take some of the responsibility for us not having further conversations about how we were going to fund this school resource officer. We were pretty busy in the fall and the winter with the changeover. So again, it's something we can discuss. I don't know when the proper format is. Is it right now? Do you want us to put it in the budget and increase the percentage? I'm not going to cut any more teachers for the resource officer. I'm not going to bring my number lower. We're going to look at the 299. We're going to look at that $50,000 to $60,000 cut and see if we can go deeper that way, just organically and naturally, because we're trying to be fiscally conservative. But if I add money in for a resource officer, I am not taking things away from the educational aspect of our school budget. All right, especially considering Kingston's already paying those dollars, and so is Plimpton.
Right, and I understand that and I'm not going to speak for the whole committee because we don't have a quorum, so we couldn't take a vote tonight on whether or not we, want to ask for specific things. But I think that where we see potential examples in other districts where school resource officers are able to share duties from the SROs from different towns, might be able to step in, might be able to contribute to that position. I think what we're really asking for is a way to be included in the conversation about what that position looks like in terms of hours, in terms of will a Halifax SRO ever be allowed to staff that position? So we have some continuity between the officers that students at HES see when they're younger and then the ones they see when they get to the high school. We're not again, this is me speaking personally, debating whether or not we support the idea of it. But at the point where the school has to be viewed from our perspective as one of our departments, and we don't allow any other department to say, well, here's a level service budget, but then on the side, here's an article where we're going to ask for a new custodian. We don't permit that to happen, because at what point does that stop? At what point are we able to effectively manage our budget if we allow that type of procedure? And we're not picking on you, and this isn't. I'm not. And I don't want it to we're brought here to slap your wrists at all. It's more out of honestly a desire to see something that everyone seems to want structured the right way, and structured fairly. Because I think as Kingston's expressed, they're already footing the bill for a full-time SRO at the high school, and if Halifax says no, but the other two towns say yes, then we have every incentive to free ride, and this is us coming to the table and saying we don't want a free ride, we want to contribute our fair share, but how can we make this a program that everyone can agree on? That's our big argument. And again, if anyone else from the committee has feedback other than that, I don't mean to speak for everybody else, but.
Yeah,
I have a comment. We have looked into this before, the different structures, how this can be organized. And I understand the police chiefs have all met, and it seems to me that it needs to be a Kingston officer, that it could not be from one of the other towns, so it has to be a Kingston officer. But the makeup of where the funds come from, we have looked at some similar entities to ours, and there's an intermunicipal agreement between the towns.
Right.
And it's located within the town's budget, and they are then paying the town that's actually using the officer. And that seems to be the mechanism that we have found for school districts that are organized in a similar manner to us, when they're a regional setup. So that's what we did find. That seemed to be more the norm of how that was set up, the intermunicipal agreement between the towns. So it was outside of the operating budget of the regional schools.
Sandy?
One of the issues last year when it was brought to us initially was that we'd be paying time and a half salary to the officer, which seemed unreasonable if it was going to be a regular position, that Halifax and Plimpton would have to pay that officer at time and a half.
Does that have to do with the benefit that Kingston's stuck with on the way?
It has to do with
I don't know what
staffing
it
the
has to do
position,
with.
because you're not hiring another full-time position.
Okay. I wasn't sure if the benefits, pensions over that stick with the officer would be.
It just had to do that we're not asking for a full-time officer to take the position. Because if we did that, we'd have to fund a full-time officer. So the only way to fund the time that the school is open is for the 20 hours to be paid at an overtime rate.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, it would change the staffing levels within Kingston's department.
I couldn't remember what it was then.
I put in a call to Bridgewater Raynham because I think, and just from talking to other folks, it seemed that they were able to negotiate an agreement where both towns' SROs were able to share responsibilities. Basically, anyone who was licensed as an SRO was able to contribute hours, and the hours would be able to divide it up between Bridgewater and Raynham. I haven't seen the agreement. I put in an email to the superintendent to ask for a copy, so this is just hearsay at this point, but I think all of us wish we were having this discussion a few months back to think about how we'd want to structure this and whether or not there might be other models, because I think to Christine's point, that you did do the work, and again, we're not saying anyone didn't do the work, but if there are other options out there that don't, again, stick Kingston with overtime pay and leave every reason for Halifax to defect and still receive the benefit, then that's an option that we wanted to explore, and something that we wanted to talk about. Because last year it did get voted down at our annual town meeting. We did not think it was going to go that way. We had put it in our budget assuming it was going to pass. Obviously, it's what the town votes at the end of the day is what happens. And the fact that the town did not vote to recommend that position, we're also listening to the taxpayers and listening to what the citizens' concerns are. So that's another one of the things that we wanted to be able to express to everyone tonight, that there was at least a sentiment that this wasn't the right way to go about things. So I don't know if there's any.
Yeah, just as a citizen of
Yeah.
Plimpton, we voted after Halifax voted,
Mm-hmm.
and it was unanimous on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
So even with the conversation, seeing how Halifax voted, and
Mhm.
understanding Halifax's concern,
Mm-hmm.
Plimpton chose to vote unanimously in favor
Mm-hmm.
of the part-time SRO at the middle school.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how much our towns influence each other. I tend to think quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
We saw what Halifax did. Hopefully Halifax saw what we did as well. Again, we're looking for a better solution. As a resident of Plimpton, I was proud that we finally stepped up to shoulder some of the burden of the SRO that Kingston had been providing for years and years and years for our children who attend those schools. And again, I hope to come to some sort of mutually agreed upon pathway towards getting 2 full-time SROs between the 2 schools eventually. We do have the data to show how utilized our high school resource officer has been. He came to a meeting last spring that everyone was invited to with a catalog that made me ill to hear some of the things he was dealing with on a daily basis. School is not what it used to be. And the needs of our children are ever increasing. And there's been many times where our school resource officer at the high school had gone over to the middle school. He still goes over from time to time to support the current officer over there. I've been to a few nighttime events, and both of those officers have been at those events, and they have not been on the clock. They've become part of the community of that school. And to know that your children and my children have the benefit of meeting these officers in that capacity before things go sour.
It's the relationship building that really has the greatest impact. We think of it in terms of safety, but it goes beyond that. It's about the relationship that they build with the students and the sense of community that they're creating to prevent, or to at least give students another opportunity to form a positive relationship with a responsible adult that can help steer them in the right direction.
Officer Allen has gotten kids to come to school who nobody else could get to come to school. Teachers, administrators, parents have tried. He reached out, and those children believed in him and knew he cared. They're back in our classrooms right now. And we know you don't philosophically disagree, but as of right now, the only method we have until we come up with more research and more data is the article. And we understand if you can't support it from your standpoint. And we'll continue to try and work this out for the future. So it becomes something that's palatable to all parties, and we can all stand up at town meeting and support it and vote for it.
Yeah, I think we're really just at the level of getting it worked into the school budget and having it come through assessment. And like I said, it might seem like we're just arguing over like a little procedural issue and everyone agrees that it's something that we need to do. But like I said, last year we turned down every other new position request. And based on not knowing exactly where the budget stand this year yet, either we've got new position requests and we don't know whether or not we're gonna be able to say yes. And many of them were the same position requests that were made last year. So in terms of equity, we have to be sure that we're treating all new position requests the same way. Obviously, it's different to make a new position request for a department versus from a regional school district, and we understand that there's more that goes into that. But to the extent that we can equalize the process as much as possible so that we can make effective decisions and that we can, like I said, we all want the same thing. This is one of those negotiations that should be the easiest thing. We all want the exact same thing at the end. We're just a little bit in disagreement about how best to get there. So I think if we can keep having the conversation about potential solutions, and if we can reach out to folks in other regional school districts around us, or maybe even not around us, and just see what models they use, I think that would be helpful. I don't mean to add any extra homework to people. I know we're all doing volunteer work as it is, but we just want to make this something that's a workable model.
Agreed.
Yeah.
The only other method would be to add it as a subline on the education, so you see it as a budget item and not an article. It has the same effect. I mean, the only other place that we do Article 4 is the Conservation Secretary.
But that's a different payment structure. The conservation secretary is a different funding structure.
No, but I'm saying that's the only other place where we do operations is out of that. So I think if the argument is it's not, you don't want it in an article, put it as a subline on the education. Either way, it's a vote, either way, somebody can hold it. I understand the objection to it, but the problem is that the Kingston chief is the ultimate decider on who's the SRO. And he has said it's gonna be a Kingston police officer. So the interaction that we went through for the last year, our chief went and talked with him and with Superintendent Blackwood when she was here. And it has to be a Kingston officer. So we can't send an officer over there to cover those hours. That decision is not part of the school committee's responsibility. Even if we say that we're gonna fund out of our budget, we just turn to Kingston and say, we need SROs at the school. So it's not really, it's not within the purview of the school committee of who gets to come over. It's basically, here's an expense and we have to fund it.
But it still could be an expense that's covered in the operating budget, or that's still placed within the operating budget as opposed to being placed outside in a separate article.
Could be, yep.
Any other comments or discussion or feedback that anyone wants to provide?
I've already probably said more than I should, so I'm done.
No, this is really, really helpful.
What is Halifax at right now for requested lines versus what we have available?
Sandy just sent over the last. So Halifax has the last couple of years tried to leave $3,000 on the table.
300.
300. What did I say? 3,000. Oh yeah. No. Look at us. No. 300,000. We're patting ourselves in the back for 3,000. All right. All right. We still have several positions or several things that aren't filled in. So I'm just trying to find.
Also, none of the wages have been done. None
Yeah.
of the union contracts have been looked at,
Yeah.
and the wage improvement. So it's early to say. With the information that we're still in the black, we're not in the red, which is a good thing,
So you don't have
but
anything
we're
penciled
not
in?
much in the black. And we haven't done anything with wages yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this was the one from the 13th, Sandy?
Mhm.
Is that the most updated one we have?
That's the most updated. I think we still have two holes in it. I know the telephone
Yeah.
line hasn't been filled in, and there's another line, I believe, that
All right,
hasn't
so
been filled in.
if I think I'm reading it about 70,000 in the black.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and like I said, we
Yeah,
haven't
that's
talked
without
about
anything
wages
else.
at all.
Yeah.
2%'s about 100 to 120.
So, as I said,
So, do you have 300 taken out, or the 300 plus the 186 that we had figured
no,
in for the?
300.
So that's even spending the money that we left for the debt payment for the Pope's Tavern?
Yep.
That's not good.
So if I could make a final statement, I just wanted to also make it clear that the school committee is working to try and find any revenue streams it can find. Our Chapter 74 programs have garnered the attraction of local schools on the South Shore who constantly call, seeing if there's any way they can tuition children in. And that tuition is a full tuition. It's not like
It's not the 5,000.
school choice that you get for $5,000. So the programs we're building in Silver Lake High School are attractive in that capacity. And when we don't have a student from Plimpton or Halifax or Kingston who wants that seat, we have the opportunity to gain some revenue in that way. We do have the solar purchase down in New Bedford, the solar farm that we're still, Dartmouth, I'm sorry, we're still getting some revenue from. We looked into doing solar canopies, putting solar panels on the roof. We're looking at all opportunities where we can bring in revenue, but we're also vigorously engaging our legislators, both at the state and the federal level, to make sure that we're recognized and we're heard. Rep. Lenatra is in a coalition with Rep. Cutler from Duxbury to try and get a $100 per pupil minimum increment for our students. Currently, it's set at $30 in Governor Baker's budget. She's also been in conferences recently with something that's called the Special Ed Gap Funding Bill. When they redid the formula for Chapter 70 last year, they upped the estimation of how many of our students have disabilities from 15% to 16%, even though the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education acknowledged the statewide number is 18.4%. Yeah. So Rep. Lenatra is working with a coalition, a bipartisan coalition, to try and get that number moved to the 18.4% for this year. So that would be addressed in circuit breaker funding we would get back. And we're also engaging our federal delegation as well to make sure that they're fully funding the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. We're only receiving about 40% of what the federal government should be giving us for our students with extraordinary special ed costs. The Perkins grant we already talked about today, how it helps us here in Silver Lake roll out some new projects that then bring in additional Chapter 74 funds. The school committee is working its tails off to try and make sure that the money is meeting somewhere in the middle and trying to be responsible to the 3 towns that we're requesting the funds from as well.
Thank you very much. I know everyone from Halifax, the Finance Committee, and other parts of government sincerely thanks Silver Lake and everyone there. Like we said, we're all volunteers. We're all trying to do the best that we can on top of all of our other responsibilities, and we understand that everyone's dealing with extraordinary pressures and people's livelihoods are at stake and children's education is at stake, and this is no small feat and no small responsibility to bear. So I know we all appreciate everything you do, and I'm glad that we were able to take time tonight to all meet in person as opposed to, well, I hear this person said this and I hear this town didn't like this. I think the more that we can just take an hour out whenever we can to touch base, it's going to make it so much easier and I think more efficient in our communication and the way we interact with each other. So I just want to say thank you again to everyone who drove here tonight, took time out to meet, and again, thanks to Linda for getting us all organized. And let's keep the conversation going as much as we can over electronic means and other ways. So thank you again, everyone, for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
How are we doing?
So Halifax still is with us.
I skied for years and I never had
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
My kids laughed, by the way.
All those in favor?
Conservation meeting.